Another thing I want to talk about is I'm kind of sick of us being football fans. We're kind of the Mormons of Australian sport, where we're constantly having to do this, having to proselytize, having to convince other people how great our game is. And that's another thing I don't know, man. Like, are they going to get it? You know, this is where I'm probably a lot more negative than you are. I mean, you seem very hopeful, but how long can we do this for?
I think that'll always be the case. But I look at our evolution as a sport, and you look at leaders that we've had in the sport. So when I say leaders, Ange Postecoglou is the current example of a leader in the sport who's breaking down new barriers. He's the first Australian to become an English Premier League coach, and he's become a very successful one at that instantly. So he's breaking through those barriers. All of a sudden, you've got AFL people, NRL people wanting to go and visit Ange in Tottenham to understand what he's doing. He's a hero. And so he's a flag bearer for our sport in this country. So I think that we will always battle, because we'll always be behind the AFL if you live in the southern states. We'll always be behind the NRL if you live in New South Wales or Queensland. But as we've seen, week in, week out, it is difficult to break through those barriers. But this sport unites. And with our national teams, they are the most popular national teams. The Matildas are the most popular national team across Australia.
100%.
There's no arguing that fact. And the Socceroos aren't far behind them. So it might be that we're battling week in, week out, but there is a true love for our code and for our national teams. And we have to hang on to that and leverage that.
You brought up Ange. Were you looking at my notes? Because that's exactly where I was going. What have you made of his time at Tottenham specifically, and also Celtic as well?
Yeah.
I mean, so many Australians are following Ange specifically. I don't think in my life I had ever watched an SPL game. I watched almost every Celtic game for 2 years straight because of him. What did you make of his first 2 seasons in Europe, and then where do you see the Ange narrative at right now with Tottenham?
I love how honest he is. I love how frank he is, and he hasn't changed. That's the way he'd talk to Australian media. That's, I would interview him as the Brisbane Roar coach or as the Melbourne Victory coach, and he is exactly the same when he's answering questions with the media in the UK. I was lucky enough to travel over there for Channel 10 and spend some time with him at Celtic. When he won his first championship there at the end of the first season, and to be in the stadium on the day that they were handed over the trophy. So they'd already secured the title, right. So it was a celebration. It was the final game of the season. They were doing the trophy presentation. It was Tom Rogic's last game, so it had everything. There were 60,000 fans in there, all supporting one team. And the chants for Ange and the chants for Tommy Rogic, they love the guy. And they still do, even though he left after 2 seasons. So he made an instant impact. We know that there were a lot of naysayers globally saying, who's Ange who? And some famous, TV presenters talking about the fact that he would fail. He proved them wrong. He continues to prove people wrong, even in the UK now and in the English Premier League, because, again, that's another step up. So it doesn't surprise me that he was picked up by Tottenham. It doesn't surprise me that he was successful at Celtic. It doesn't surprise me he was successful at Tottenham. And I think they'll finish, in Europe. That is a success for Tottenham based on what's gone before them in previous years. That'll give him the impetus to bring in more players and potentially next season challenge for a title. I think that's what he'll aim for, and he'll make no apologies for that. He even still talks to this day about challenging for the title this season. So if he's not doing that, then why is he there?
Do you think that's a real possibility with this Tottenham side next season, pushing for that title?
I think so, yeah. The way he coaches them, he's instantly, and let's not forget, sometimes it takes years for a coach to make his mark or imprint on a team. Ange does it pretty quickly. Yeah. And that's what makes him such a great coach.
It's funny though, because in the English media, I've noticed a little bit of negativity is creeping in, where people, it feels like they're almost rooting for him to fail in a way. Have you noticed that? And as someone who has worked in football broadcasting for so long, do you notice any differences between the Australian media and the English media? I noticed that there it's a lot more negative. I don't know if maybe you would have different views. What do you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think, well, as Australian football media, we're nowhere near as harsh as Italian football media or as English football media are. And part of that, rightly or wrongly, is because we're doing what you touched on earlier, and that we're advocates for our sport. So we're trying to promote the sport and not focus on the negative side of things. So if there's a 50-50, we tend to lean on the positive side rather than the negative.
Well, that's you. I've been very negative this interview, I suppose.
But the English media are a lot more harsh and a lot more critical. And you're right, there are people wanting him to fail because he doesn't fit the mould. So they want to say, I told you so. And that just drives someone like Ange even further to prove them wrong.